It's very tricky for him. And of course, the shortages are an unpleasant echo of the Soviet Union in its death throes. And I remember terrifying experiences in car parks where people were pouring petrol from one jerry can into another, smoking as they did so. So there's a kind of folk memory of in Russia that shortages mean things are really falling apart.
As the war in Ukraine grinds on and Kyiv continues to make daring drone raids deep inside Russia, Vladimir Putin has reportedly ordered his military to find ways to launch new offensive operations in a bid to capture the capital, Kyiv. That's according to Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky. These include offensives launched from Belarusian territory and a potential strike from Russia's bordering Bryansk region. Meanwhile, my next guest, Edward Lucas, argues in his comment piece in tomorrow's Times that as Russia's economy is entering its endgame, it must now be hit with more sanctions. So let's take a view on all of that by saying hello to Edward Lucas. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Kate.
The Russian economy is stagnating. That's what I was reading economic experts were saying at the Vienna Institute a couple of days ago. And even Vladimir Putin seems to be accepting that all is not well at the moment, Edward.
Yes, and the fact that he's actually went out on telly at the weekend and admitted that there were problems is quite significant because even by the standards of some other governments, the kind of Kremlin lie machine has been telling a tall tale. Actually, the Russian economy didn't do badly at the beginning of the war. They were able to nip and tuck. China helped them a lot. They had a pretty big rainy day fund, which they were able to draw down. But now it's really hurting. And on top of that, they have the Ukrainian drone and missile strikes, which have led to dramatic fuel shortages all over the place, not just in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but also in the far-flung regions of Russia and occupied Crimea. And that's a very big plus for the Ukrainians. It forces the Russians to think about where they put their air defences. And if you're defending your remaining oil refineries, then you haven't got those air defences at the front, which is where you also need them. So I think Putin's in hot water, to use a non-technical economic term. And the Kyiv Institute for the World Economy produced a very good report called Endgame. And I mentioned that in my column in tomorrow's Times, and they argue that, yes, absolutely, now's the time to really crank up the pressure on the Russian economy and turn this economic problem into a political one.
What does turning up the pressure mean then?
They've got one very ingenious idea, which is to apply a Ukraine tariff to all Russia's non-sanctioned exports, because Russia still actually exports quite a lot, fertilizer, for example, chemicals, some liquefied natural gas. And they said if you put a 20% tariff on those exports, that both drives down the revenue for Russia and it also creates a funding stream for Ukraine. So that's one thing. Another thing is to be a lot tougher on the shadow fleet, because Russia's energy exports, oil, gas, refined products, are really the main source of income for keeping this war going. And if we can make it a lot harder for them physically to ship those, particularly oil and refined products, to their customers in India and elsewhere, that's really throwing sand in the gears for Putin.
It is the fuel shortages in Russia domestically which are causing the most problems. That is what led to Vladimir Putin giving a pretty honest answer to a question during that interview about what is hurting him at the moment. How will he try and address that, do you think? Do you think, just thinking at this from sort of Putin's position, how does he try and rectify what is going on within Russia? Has he got levers to pull?
It's very tricky for him. And of course, the shortages are an unpleasant echo of the Soviet Union in its death throes. And I remember terrifying experiences in car parks where people were pouring petrol from one jerry can into another, smoking as they did so. So there's a kind of folk memory of in Russia that shortages mean things are really falling apart. He can try repression, and there's reports of the crackdowns on the black market. The Prime Minister has announced he's suspending the publication of statistics about fuel prices, which is a bit like when there's a light on the dashboard that you don't like. Instead of trying to fix your car, you just smash the light with a hammer. That's another traditional sort of Soviet tactic. And then there's distraction, and he's ordered his generals, as you mentioned in the intro, to look at other ways of trying to attack Ukraine. But none of those are easy or even, I think, possible.
Yes.
So I would say he's flailing, basically, and that's good.
Are those planned attacks, are those threats to look at new ways to sort of capture Kyiv? Is that just hyperbole? Is that just Putin putting a brave face on it, or will he genuinely be asking the army to sit down and game plan how they try and take the offensive to Kyiv rather than the other way around?
Well, I mean, he can tell the army to make a plan for conquering London on Mars.
True.
But there's a brilliant Russian word which I can use in Russian, which is vranyo, which I couldn't use in English. Your Russian-speaking listeners will flinch. But that's politely translated, that's baloney. And I think that's what Russia will be saying, that if they had the forces to implement these plans, they'd be using them already. And Russia's actually terribly short of troops. It's inching forward at an enormous cost in some parts of the front and losing ground in others. And the idea that they can magic up a few new brigades or divisions or corps or whatever else they might need to attack from a different direction is fancy. They can only do that by taking troops away from some other part of the front, unless, of course, Putin wants to go down the road of full mobilization. If he does that, it's a huge sign of failure and will meet very considerable resistance.
Yeah, just to give the numbers on how their energy crisis is taking hold. Analysts estimate that more than a fifth of Russia's total refining capacity may have been knocked offline already. And the International Energy Agency, the IEA, reported last week that Russian crude oil production dropped by around 5% year on year last month due to the strikes. You talked in your column about Russia proposing to import from Kazakhstan, Belarus, and other countries.
Yes, it's astonishing, and this is one of the world's great energy superpowers. Is now planning to import diesel and gasoline from places like India. And of course the trouble with that is that the Ukrainians will have a very beady eye on those supply lines and will probably be targeting them quite effectively. So it's not an easy solution. It's humiliating. And this is it was the great thing people used to say about Nigeria. It was Nigeria produced huge amounts of oil but didn't have a single working refinery. Nigeria's now fixed that problem. They've got a very large modern refinery which is doing very well. But the Ukrainians have spotted that these things called catalytic crackers, which are, sorry, my voice is doing a catalytic crack.
Bless you.
The catalytic crackers are the things that make modern oil refineries work. And they're very expensive and delicate and difficult to replace, and Ukraine's targeting them, and which is much more effective than just targeting storage depots and pipelines, because these things take 18 months if you can get the spare parts to fix it, and they're only available from China. And of course, that's another thing which I highlight in my column, is that this China is becoming increasingly the dominant partner in its relations with Russia. It's exerting a very high price.
Yeah, it certainly is, which means that Putin then owes Beijing effectively. You talk in your column about Russia confounding the Western doom mongers, including you, with the full-scale invasion in 2022. Just to sort of zoom out on this, do you think in terms of energy and impetus, Russia's been on the offensive for so long and Kyiv is standing up to them so well and in new and different ways that sort of Russia is simply exhausted, and an economy which is struggling, signs, fuel shortages and other signs that things are not well, is starting to affect the public's appetite for this war? Is there an exhaustion problem within the country?
Well, I think there's an exhaustion problem in the economy, that none of the levers that they've got are working very well. The fiscal stimulus, spend like crazy, is running up into there's problems potentially with inflation, and the productive side of the economy has been squeezed by the demands of the war machine. The tight monetary policy has had its limits. There's a lot of bad loans sloshing around. They've had a lot of highly subsidized loans to important companies. where the banks are made to lend money. Of course, that's bad for the banks' balance sheets. The deficit is going up. They reached in the middle of the year the deficit they were planning to reach at the end of the year. Now, none of this means that Putin is out of options, but all the options are bad. So he can tax more, that goes down badly. He can go begging to China, that has its problems. He could raid private savings, and that will be a big dramatic thing, which used to happen in the late Soviet Union, when suddenly all your rubles were just taken away by the state or told they weren't worth anything. So they're all pretty hardcore stuff. And it certainly undermines the idea of normality. And as I say in the column, the great achievement of Putin is that he's given the Russians 26 years of knowing that today's going to be like yesterday and tomorrow's going to be like today.
A functioning economy.
And consumer goods, basically available the length and breadth of Russia, which is a huge country, and a banking system where you could just go to a bank machine, a hole in the wall machine, and get your money out, and you get some interest on your savings. And all these sort of basic things that are totally unusual by Russian standards, particularly where they're available basically to everyone. And now all that has gone. And so it's a huge bonfire of the regime's credibility. Doesn't mean that they're going to fall tomorrow, but it does mean that the regime looks a great deal more brittle.
Look, Edward, it's great to speak to you. Thank you. I've had a quick look through your column. It landed late, but hot off the press nonetheless. And it features in tomorrow's paper. Our listeners have had a sneak preview of it. It'll be up online a little bit later on. It's great to speak to you, as always. The Times columnist there, Edward Lucas. Thanks, Edward.